Alrighty, yo guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are all doing absolutely fantastic. We're here with another video today. We're going to be doing something a little bit different, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy this. Haven't necessarily seen anyone else do this, but I think it should be pretty fun and interesting. We're going to be going over some of my big calls for 2023, but we're going to do it a little bit different and more so based on some statistical changes that are very likely to happen and that have happened in the past, say 10 seasons, mainly around the AFL ladder. And another interesting thing here as well, which you'll shortly see. But before we get into it, I just want to say a huge thank you to you guys for 100 subscribers. The last tipping video has gone significantly better than I expected it to. So if you're coming from that video, thank you very much. And if you've continued to stay around, if you subscribed as well, thank you so much for that. We actually hit over 100 subscribers just last night. So huge shout out to you guys. You guys are absolutely awesome. And yeah, if you haven't seen my last few videos, make sure you go check those out. And if this is your first video and you do end up enjoying it, make sure you smash that like and subscribe. That'd be greatly appreciated. All right, so just before we get into this, I'm going to explain how this works. I've actually made my own tier maker here, and I'll link it down below. If you guys want to do this and tweet it at me, go ahead and do that. I'd be very interested to see what you guys come up with here. But basically, I've gone through, the last 10 years since 2012, and I've actually looked at what are statistically some of the biggest changes or big calls to happen with the AFL ladder and AFL teams. So starting at the top here, we have teams to drop out of the top 4. We have the next one being teams to drop out of the top 8. Bottom 4 teams to make the top 8, which has happened, it does happen every year. The next one we have here is a bottom 4 team to make the top 8. So we see this happen just about every year. I think it's happened 9 out of the last 10 times. Obviously last year we see that being Collingwood going from the bottom 4 in 2021 up to the top 4 last year. The year before that it was Sydney going from the bottom 4 to the top 8. So though it seems super unlikely for something to happen like this, it does happen most years. So yeah, something interesting to look out there. The next one we have is a team to lose their first 5 games, which, believe it or not, has happened 9 out of the last 10 years since 2012. The only exception to this rule has been North Melbourne in 2019, who lost their first 3 games, then won 1, so they've won 4 out of their first 5. But yeah, crazy to actually think that this happens or has happened 9 out of the 10 last years. Obviously last year it was Port Adelaide losing their first 5. The year before that we had North in 2021, we had Adelaide in 2020, 2019 obviously, as I said, North with a 1 exception to that, and then in 2018 we had Carlton losing their first. They lost a lot more than actually their first 5 games. But yeah, and then next up here for the last one, which probably seems like the biggest call here, is coaches to get sacked or moved on, however you like to look at it. And this has happened and does happen just about every year. So if we look here, in 2022, we had Brett Ratton, Ben Rutten, Leon Cameron, and David Noble being moved on. The year before that, in 2021, we had Nathan Buckley, David Teague, and Alistair Clarkson. The year before that, in 2020, we had Rhys Shaw and John Worsfold. And then previous to that, in 2019, we had Alan Richardson, Don Pike, and Ross Lyons. So many coaches being moved on, and there is no doubt in my mind that it's going to happen to at least one coach here in 2023. All right, so with all that being out of the way, let's go ahead and jump straight into this, and we'll start off with teams to drop out of the top 4. So realistically, most of the time it's only one team. If you go ahead and look at the last 10 years, I think, yeah, like 7 or 8 times, the top 4 does change by at least one team. Now, in my opinion, and if you've seen my previous full season predictions, which I made a few videos ago, if you want to check that out, you can, of course. But teams to drop out of the top 4, I think this is a little bit more of an obvious one, or one that, probably more people are going to actually be saying, and that is Sydney. I do think, purely because of that grand final statistic and getting smashed, it does mean, or usually we see a dramatic drop off in that team that, gets smacked up in the grand final. The really only exception to that was actually Collingwood in 2018, who still made top 4 the previous year. But of course, we've seen the Western Bulldogs miss finals. Or sorry, not miss finals, but you know, make the top 8 and go out in that first final. So yeah, something that definitely does happen. I think Sydney, just because of that, you know, not that I think they're going to be a terrible team. I think they should bounce back up, but because of that, I'm going to say they are probably one of the teams to drop out of the top 4. And the other team I think here that might drop out is the Geelong Cats. Now, people are going to come at me for this, and rightly so, because, you know, people have been saying this for the last 10 years, and this is, you know, this is quite an outlandish prediction here, because realistically, there's no reason for the Cats to fall out. Now, personally, the only reasoning I see for them to possibly fall out of the top 4 is other teams being more competitive this year, but also the fact that they've finally made that grand final and they've finally won that grand final after 10 or so years of being up there in the top 4. So I think it could be more of a mental thing, and then maybe losing hunger now that these players have finally, you know, obviously reached the top. They've gotten that final reward. So maybe, just maybe, that might play on. Either that, or it does the complete opposite, makes me look like an idiot, and they do end up, you know, winning another grand final. But by no means, you know, if the Cats are out of the top 4, that it doesn't even come close to ruling them out, to making the grand final. And I think another one here that people will probably predict, personally, I don't see this happening, but I think the Magpies are one that a lot of people have on their radar, purely because of the statistic, you know, of losing so many close games. I think we won 11 out of the 12 games that we were in that were decided by 2 goals or less, which realistically is an insane statistic. Even myself, being a Collingwood supporter here, can see that, you know, that's probably unlikely to happen again if we get in so many close games. But I personally don't think this is going to happen, so I'm going to take us out of there. And the reason I say that is because our team has only gotten stronger over the off-season here. So a bit of a biased prediction from myself here, and I totally get if you guys are going to, you know, come at me for that. By all means, please comment down below if you think I'm an idiot, or, you know, think that's totally ludicrous. I'm pretty happy with that. Swans, definitely, I think a lot of you guys will probably agree with. And the Cats, well, probably not so much. But, you know, I think it's more of a mental thing and a hunger thing, not necessarily because of their team. Next up, we've got teams to drop out of the top 8. So usually we see 2 or 3 teams rotate out of the top 8. That's like the absolute bare minimum, is at least 2. Most likely 3. So for me, the obvious one here, the first one, is the Western Bulldogs. I mean, realistically, should not have been in the top 8 whatsoever. If you've seen my predictions video, you know how I feel about the Bulldogs in 2023 and where I think they might end up. So yeah, I think their team, I don't know. I just think they're not going to be humming this year, and I think they might be one of these teams that possibly fall into these next 2 categories here. So I'm going to say the Bulldogs drop out of the top 8. All right, so the next one here, this is sort of probably on the more unpopular of opinions here, but I'm actually going to go ahead and say Richmond drop out of the top 8. Personally, I think they are, I mean, they didn't scrape in 2022, to be completely honest, but I just don't see the hype in them popping back up to the top of the teams. A lot of people are saying, you know, Richmond are going to be back up there in premiership contention, and by no means do I think they're going to be a bad team in 2023, but for me, I think they're still on the way down after that premiership run they've had. Now, they might do something absolutely spectacular and, you know, find themselves being a rejuvenated team, but I don't know. They've had a lot of experience leave. I know they did pick up Tim Taranto, and I think it was Jacob Hopper as well, but I'm just not so convinced that you know, those 2 players are going to be the difference to, you know, make the Tigers bounce back into that top 4. And I personally see them more likely, you know, falling out of the top 8 here. For most of the year, they had a chance to actually make that top 4 spot, and they did, you know, miss out on it there. For me, not really much else in terms of reasoning on why they might fall out. I just think things aren't going to go perfectly for them, and I still think they're going to drop a bit more before they do begin to rise again. All right, now my third and final team that I think are most likely to drop out of the top 8 again goes to the Sydney Swans. Yeah, as I said, I think they're going to drop out of the top 4 That, for me, I'm a lot more confident about them dropping out of the top 4 than the top 8, but I do think there's still a sneaky chance to drop out of the top 8. I do find it hard that they're going to have a drastic and, you know, significant drop off like they did, like the Adelaide Crows or the GWS Giants, for example. I'd be super surprised if they did drop out of the top 8. For me, it's the most likely being the Bulldogs, then Richmond, and then the least likely to see the Swans drop out of the top 8. If anything, I think they're going to be in that sort of 6 to 8 bracket in the top 8. But yeah, purely, you know, it's got nothing to do with their team. It's just the statistics that I am so heavily, I guess, basing this opinion on. But I think, yeah, Sydney are a sneaky chance to drop out of the top 8. All right, so this next one here is the bottom 4 team that is most likely, or bottom 4 teams that are most likely to make the top 8. Now, this on average does happen every 3 to 4 years. So last year it was the Pies going from the bottom 4 up into the top 4. Previous to that, it was the Lions, and I think 2018 that jumped up into the top 4 in 2019. So this is something that happens. And I think, to be honest, if it does happen this year, it's going to either be the Eagles, purely because they're such an experienced side. I mean, I'd be absolutely flabbergasted if they are in the bottom 4 again. But I think they could, okay? I think they do have a chance to make a shock improvement like the Pies did last year. They just should not be anywhere near the bottom. The only thing that concerns me about the Eagles is really just the hunger of their players, and are they really willing to put in the hard yards and try and make a run back to the top? I mean, I guess all teams are willing to do that. I guess the difference with the Eagles and say the Pies from last year is the Pies had, you know, some really young talent, some young players there that were fresh and, you know, just getting started in their AFL career. Whereas the West Coast Eagles, well, their list is a lot older and they haven't really started that rebuild phase like some of those teams that drop off do. I did actually predict them to come 11th in my season predictions, so it's realistically not too far off where I thought they'd be. I do expect them to make a big jump from last year because they are so much better than 17th. But to make the top 8, they're again going to have to make a pretty big improvement there. And the next one here is the Essendon Bombers that, of course, finished 15th in 2022. Yeah, them I'm actually feeling a lot more. I'm going to shift them to the left because I'm more confident about them actually making the top 8 than the Eagles. I think they've got a great young list. They've got some really good players in there. I think for them, it's just really their coach. I don't think they've made the best decisions with their coaching panel in recent years because their list, again, is so much better than they played in 2022. And usually the Dons come out with, you know, some decent form at the start of the year. So I'm expecting the Dons to, yeah, make a pretty good improvement in 2023. And I wouldn't be surprised, again, if they just make it into finals like they did in 2021. Whether or not they're good enough to win a final, we'll find out. But yeah, we can't forget they also picked up Sam Wiedemann in the offseason. I think he's definitely going to help out in their forward line for sure. And he should be a player that I see playing most of the games for them. Now, the other bottom 4 teams that we've seen from 2022, that being Giants and North Melbourne, I don't see them having a chance of making the top 8. Maybe if something miraculous happens, North Melbourne, maybe, but Giants, man, their list has just been absolutely battered, and I don't know. I don't see a world where they can make the top 8. Let me know what you guys think. Alrighty, moving on to the next category here of Big Call. We have a team that is the most likely to lose their first 5 games of 2023. So as I said earlier, this has happened 9 out of the last 10 years. Last year, obviously, being Port Adelaide. Now, this year, for me, it is, I don't know why, but the Bulldogs, I just see them having a terrible year. And I'm sorry, Bulldogs fans. It's not that I wish the Bulldogs to have a terrible year. It's just something I can see happening for no apparent reason whatsoever, purely because these things just happen. And it's statistically proven that just about every year, 9 out of the last 10, there's a team that's going to lose 4 or 5 of their first 5 games. The only exception to that, obviously, as I said earlier, North Melbourne. But in terms of this year, yeah, the Bulldogs, I think they're on the tipping point of either going straight down to the bottom or going up For me, I see them going straight down to the bottom. Just haven't really been able to get the most out of their team the last few years. They've not been able to scrape into that top 4. And I think, some people would argue they've overachieved in those years that they've made it from outside of the top 4 into a grand final like they did in 2021 and then had that huge fall off. But yeah, I don't know. Bulldogs, something about them for me that I see them being a stinky little chance to lose their first 5 games. Now, another obvious option here is probably North Melbourne, but I actually don't see them losing their first 5 games. Now, if we look at their fixture in round 1, they're actually taking on the West Coast Eagles. Now, I have them predicted to beat West Coast purely because of that first coach statistics. So for my predictions, I'm actually going to rule North out for losing their first 5 games. Obviously, anything can happen, but I don't see that happening. All right, now the other team here that I can see losing their first 5 games, and one of my predictions here would probably be the GWS Giants. Now, new coach, obviously, starting up in 2023. Not only that, they've lost a plethora of great talents in the last 2 to 3 years after their grand final, and their list is, honestly, it's probably one of the youngest now in the AFL. Probably, bottom 5 in terms of the youngest AFL lists. Now, if you actually look at the fixture of GWS's first 5 games, you probably wouldn't think they're that much of a risk of losing their first 5. But if we look at it here, Crows, I've predicted them to lose in round 1. They've got the Eagles in round 2, which I think is a bit of a 50-50. Now, if we look at the first 5 games of the Giants, it's actually a bit of a mixed bag. They've got the Eagles, the Crows, Carlton, Essendon, and Hawthorn. And now in round 1, I predict them to lose against the Crows. Eagles, I see being a bit of a 50-50. Carlton, I'm pretty certain they're going to lose that. Essendon, I think that's another 50-50 game depending on how the Dons are going. And in round 5, they've got the Hawks. But again, I see them probably losing that. Their list has been absolutely smacked, the Giants. But I don't know, every time I see the Giants having a bit of an off year, they seem to just somehow do better than everyone expects. So I don't know, but yeah, I think there's a lot of 50-50s for the Giants, and they're one of the potential teams I could see losing their first 5. So yeah, that's about it for this one here. Let's move on to the last, and I think the most, the biggest calls when it comes to these for this tier list, and that is coaches that have the chance of getting sacked in 2023. Now, in my opinion, there's really only 2 coaches that have a chance or could be considered at risk of losing their job in 2023, unless there's a coach that voluntarily decides to move themselves on. But the first one for me, and the most likely, is probably Port Adelaide. I think Ken Hinkley is under the most pressure. Like, realistically, if Port Adelaide don't make the finals again this year, and I think even finals is not going to be enough to satisfy the Port Adelaide fans. And if you are a Port fan, let me know down below, what are you expecting from your team in 2023? But I know if I was a Port fan, going off 2 top 4 finishes previous to 2022, I'd expect nothing less than probably a top 4 finish. I mean, this might be harsh, and this is why I need to hear from the Port fans. Obviously, I can't say for certain, what the expectations are, because I'm not a Port fan. But yeah, going off, the great years that they had and the great list they've got and some of the talent in that team, I'd say a top 4 finish is probably the very least for Ken Hinkley and what would keep him around for another year, in my opinion. But yeah, I want to hear you guys' opinions on this down below. So that's why I've got Port Adelaide here as probably the most risk at being sacked in 2023. And closely behind that, I think we also have the Western Bulldogs. Again, this is one that a lot of people are seeing the Western Bulldogs, jumping back up into the top 4. But for me, I see them dropping out. Haven't been super impressive. I don't want to keep repeating myself. I'm going to sound like a broken record. But yeah, I don't think things are going to go right by the Bulldogs this year. And I think there's likely that, one of these 2 teams are going to see their coach changed at the mid-year break. So, all right. So for me, this looks pretty good, honestly. Obviously, you can put as many teams in these categories as you want. But for me, I'm happy with these 2, the Swans and the Cats, being a chance of dropping out from the top 4. We've got these 3 teams to drop out of the top 8. We've got Essendon and the Eagles being a chance to make the top 8 from the bottom 4. First 5 games to be potentially lost. I think the Bulldogs and the Giants are definitely in that spotlight. And coaches to get sacked, well, I think Port Adelaide, Ken Hinkley and Luke Beveridge are definitely the most likely for this to happen. Maybe some of you guys will go ahead and chuck West Coast Eagles in here based on the year that they had last year. But the reason why I don't, and the only reason really why I don't have Adam Simpson, in here as a potential to get sacked is because he's made it public that he is, committed to seeing the next generation of the Eagles team. And I think he's, wants to stay around for the rebuild. So yeah, guys, that is it for my big calls out of these 5 categories. Let me know what you think of the style of this video and the layout. And if you have any other ideas for any big calls that I could add to this, let me know. I haven't really seen anyone else do this style of video, so I'm really keen to get you guys' opinions and thoughts down below. And if you did enjoy it, the best way to show me that is by smacking a like as well as subscribing. And if you guys haven't already, make sure you join the tipping comp down below. And I'll see you guys all at my next video, which will of course be the round 1 vlog, which I am super keen to get into. Cannot wait for the footy to get back underway. But guys, until then, I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye bye.